what I'd like to know is, what was the process of coming up with her look? The clothing, the costumes. I have people sending me things that they think are references that you used. Everybody's debating this.
Well, I mean, here is the sad truth. I can't take credit for creating any of it. I mean, I didn't create the character. Patricia Highsmith did, and then Phyllis did a beautiful job adapting the book into a screenplay. And so, I mean, the character was very much created for me in that sense. And on top of that, the look of it, I mean, Sandy Powell is like, she's next level, and costumes are so important to me in the look of the character. And I sort of just walked in and loved anything and everything she put on me. So, you know, I had a lot of say about the hair and all of that, and of course with just the entire look of her. But I was also surrounded by a lot of really talented people who knew what they were doing.
All right. Well, one of the things I wondered is if you went back to the period and looked at what the rules were then. I mean, it's such a constricted time, and it's not at all like what we deal with here now.
Yeah. I listened to this one thing, you know, in working on the dialect, I got to listen to all these sort of recordings from that time, different sorts of things, interviews, and then there was this one recording of this sort of lesson for women who are working at department stores, and the woman who's talking is sort of telling you how to be a lady and how you have to behave when you're working behind the counter. It's such a funny recording to hear, like what they were telling these girls and to how to act. It's just seems almost like a skit listening to it now. Like it's, you know,
but it's
like
also
it's sarcasm, but it's obviously not.
It's also a period when there wasn't as much, you know, therapy and you know, psychological awareness,
self-help,
and consciousness, self-consciousness.
Yeah.
And I wondered how conscious your character was about what was going on around her.
I mean, I think that she is super conscious of what's going on around her, much more so than the people she's surrounded by. And because of that, she feels really alone, even in a crowded room. And she feels unfulfilled in her life, and she doesn't really understand why. That being said, I think the feelings that she has for Carol, she doesn't have a language to describe them. She knows she feels them, but she doesn't understand what they are or what they mean, because it's totally foreign to her, and so she doesn't have any judgment about them. She literally can't talk about them, and that's why she has that super earnest conversation with Richard, her boyfriend, where she asks him if he's ever been in love with a boy. I mean, she would have asked him that had she known the implications of what that meant, but she really is very naive to what it means.
Were you moved when you read the script the first time?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, it's such a beautiful story, and it's one of the things that's so fantastic about it is that Phyllis really allowed for there to be this space between the words, and she allowed for those quiet moments and for the subtlety, and you know, it's rare that you get to read things like that.
So it was one of the better parts you've been shown.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you share some of your colleagues' frustrations with some of the roles, that because you get to see a lot of the best stuff?
Yeah.
And that's what I find so disturbing, is when the best stuff isn't good enough.
Yeah, but I mean, I get to read a lot of really good stuff. It just is a matter of whether or not it speaks to you. And definitely in the last few years, there's a lot more of it. There's a lot more really good stuff, I think, out there.
You feel like the needle is moving?
Yeah, I don't know if the needle is moving or if I just have more access to it. I don't know. I mean, I think certainly in... you know, I think in the studio world and sort of bigger movies, I don't know that the needle has moved that much. I still think there's a lot of, you know, there's always the girlfriend role, and they tend to be super generic. You know, there's like 3 different types of women you can put in that role. But the sort of smaller movies that I tend to be drawn to anyway, I think there's a lot of interesting roles for women.
And you found some good ones. I think Eighth and Body Saints.
Oh, yeah,
it's one of my favorites.
I loved that script so much. It's so beautiful.
That's one of those movies where it makes me cry that so few people saw it.
I know, and it was such an amazing experience making that film. One of my favorite.
Why?
Yeah. I don't know. It just was, you know, the film takes place in the 70s, and David Lowery and the producers, they're all these sort of kind of hippie guys. They all have, we called them the bearded men, and it felt like we really were in the 70s making a film. It was super collaborative. You know, it was just, we all were really close knit, and that was a very low budget film, so we were all really in it together, and it was really fun. We shot it in Shreveport, and it was like 103 degrees every day, but we all just loved it. You know, we're all just sweating together, and it sounds miserable, but we really loved it.
There's this one shot where you and Casey Affleck are coming down the hill together,
yeah.
and it just blew my mind what you two did.
Yeah, I remember that day. Really, that was one of the hottest days that we shot, and yeah, I remember that moment. We kind of had to rush it. That shot, we only got a few takes of it, and I don't know if David Lowery told Casey to do this, but we did one take. I think it was maybe the first take, or maybe it was the second. You know, he basically told us to not let the other person go. That we had to stay together, even though they were going to be trying to separate us. And Casey just stared at me the whole walk down, like really intensely, and I didn't know he was going to do that. I think maybe David told him to or something, but it was yeah, that was a really beautiful moment in that film.
Do you have a favorite moment in Carol?
I don't know if I have a favorite moment in the film. I don't know that I've seen it enough to remember a lot of the moments, but one of my favorite scenes to shoot, or two of my favorite scenes, the first being the first time that Carol and Therese have sort of their little lunch date, and it was the first time that me and Kate really actually got to do a scene together, you know, a substantial scene where we had all day to shoot it, which was a luxury for us, and we shot it in these really long takes, and there's so much subtlety and nuance in that scene, and it was just really, you know, to get to finally do, you know, a real scene with Kate and to get to watch her and play off her, it was really, really fun to do that scene.
Like being with one of the best tennis players.
Yeah, that's exactly what it felt like.
So it upped your game?
Oh, of course. I mean, I'm so lucky in that a majority of my performance is reactionary, and she's the thing I'm reacting to, so without her, I'm nothing.
And was one of your least favorite or more uncomfortable scenes the love scene, or did you?
No. It's such an important scene for the film, and we all knew that, and we knew it was going to be this really important moment of relief and release for these women, and that there was going to be so much tension building up to it. So we knew it was really important. And it's, of course, always uncomfortable to do a scene like that, but not any more uncomfortable than doing a scene where you have to get super emotional and you're naked in a different sense, you know. It can be embarrassing to be naked in front of people, physically or emotionally.
But you've covered a lot of ground, and this week we were all sort of wondering about these stories about the new Salander movie. Is the reason that you don't want to do it because it isn't David Fincher and you feel a certain loyalty to you wouldn't want to do it without him?
Well, I've never said I don't want to do it. I mean, I plan on doing it. I mean, until someone tells me that I'm not, it's my understanding that I am doing it. The only thing that I know to be true out of any of that is that they've hired a writer. They hired Steve Knight to adapt this fourth book that I haven't read yet, and I don't really know what David's plan is or what the studio's plan is. All I know is that Salander is my part until someone calls me up and tells me otherwise.
Glad to hear it. As it should be. But I guess what I was thinking was that the two sequels that you're contracted for don't include this fourth one, and they're jumping to the fourth one. So they can, if you don't like it, you can say no, and if they
I don't really know. It's a better question for someone who pays attention to these sort
the
of business
legalities
part of it. But
the agent, yeah.
I'm pretty sure because it's been so long that the contract is probably up at this point anyway. But I don't know.
Interesting. Okay. But that character is one of the great characters.
Oh, I mean, I love her.
Time.
It's like I'll always love her, and I feel like it's a part of me, and I definitely don't feel done with it. I mean, I went into it with the mindset I was going to be doing 3 of them, and so when I left that part, I don't feel like I felt like I was just taking it off and putting it in the closet, and that I was going to get to revisit it. So I would be devastated not to. Yeah.
The other movie that I loved that you did that didn't get enough attention was Trash.
Oh,
So
yeah.
you got to work with David. I had to like call them up and beg for a link.
Really?
You know?
I think it's on iTunes now.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah.
It just didn't do any business anywhere.
Well, I think it did, just not in our country. But yeah, that was really. I had a very small part in that film, but that was also a really special experience. Love Stephen Daldry so much, and those young boys were just. I mean, it was just really incredible to work with them. They were so. They had never acted before, you know,
Yeah.
and they did such an amazing job. And they became very protective of their characters, and my character wouldn't do that or say that. And they were at that age where they question everything. You could not manipulate them. You know, there's working with children, there is an age where you can sort of manipulate the situation, and they could not. They were very savvy little boys. They could not be manipulated into anything.
Well, they were also kind of tough street kids.
Yeah, a lot of it was, very real to them.
And you got to go to Brazil.
Yeah.
And you're going to all these exotic locations. I noticed you're going to Calcutta. Is that right?
No, I
Did
didn't.
that fall apart or something?
No, I
You did
made
it?
that film, but half of the film was shot in India and the other half was shot in Australia, and I was in the Australia part.
Ah.
I know, I didn't get to go to India.
Australia's pretty exotic.
Yeah, I had never been to Australia.
This is Lion?
Mm-hmm.
How did that go?
Oh, it was so good. I loved it so much. This director, Garth Davis, who, co-directed Top of the Lake with Jane Campion, he's just brilliant. I loved him so much, and got to work with Nicole Kidman, who I have always loved. And
Ben Mendelsohn, right?
no, that's a different one.
A different Garth Davis one.
No, that's a Benedict Andrews film that I shot with Ben. The Garth Davis one is Dev Patel and Nicole and a bunch of other people. And then after that one, I shot a film in London this past summer with Benedict Andrews, who's